don't just stand up and say, why is the government actually rendering the activities that are already being allowed in the same principle and parallel example?
Here.
Sit down, sir. Sit down. And it would have been actually a good response if there was more engagement in this issue, and since there wasn't any, we take this plastic home. And lastly, about the autonomy of your money. Well, is gambling bad? Well, the only answer that they have was it's bad because it is irrational, and it is the government's sovereignty to impose certain values upon one another. Well, we say it is our sovereignty to actually protect the people who want to engage in pleasurable activities by setting legal casinos in the borders of South Korea or whatever country that we are talking about. We don't say that you should be out of the context of gambling simply because you are poor, which is exclusively being answered by the opposition. It is if they are rich, it is okay to take the risk, and if you are poor, it is not okay to take the risk. And we say it is totally irrelevant to the values that we wish to bring in today's debate. And no value judgment involving casinos up to the deputy leader of opposition. Well, and wrapping up the case, well, let's say we actually win this debate, and we have like 100% possibility of taking this debate home. Since the basic premise that underlies the sovereignty issues and the protection issue lies within the idea that casinos are something separate from other things such as state lotteries or like private lotteries or stock markets. Since we have provided examples to you and parallel logic that is actually ongoing with these examples, we say that premise fails, and for that we are most supremely proud to propose.
Spoke for 7 minutes and 22 seconds.
We now invite the opposition witness.
Government's case today is basically they justified their entire case based on all parallel examples, saying that because we have these certain activities in our society, why not enlarge them? But never as to justifying the benefits as to why this specific activities with similar characteristics are so beneficial to the level that we need to increase the accessibility of people engaging in these activities. Two main questions arising in today's debate. Firstly, Madam Speaker, in terms of individual rights versus government's rights and duties. And secondly, in terms of impact on society and characteristic of gambling institutions that this policy would have. So firstly, regarding individuals' right versus government's right and duty. So the basic simplistic analysis coming from government side today is that basically this idea of individuals' pleasure of using their money should be guaranteed, right? And they should basically get to spend money on whatever they like. Our response to that is just because an individual wants to spend all their money buying marijuana, they're not allowed to do that, Mr. Speaker. Okay? Not in all countries or most countries aside from Netherlands, basically, or allow this activity, Mr. Speaker, basically. Because the only response we heard was that Netherlands have less amount of people addicted to it, right? But it's not only this idea of lessening addicts, Mr. Speaker, because it's going against the very idea that an individual needs to sustain on smoking weed to pursue happiness that these different governments are against, right? Because that's not. Basically, these governments are sending that message through their legal system that that's not the dignity of rights or idea of freedom, right, that these governments want to pursue when your freedom is handcuffed by such an addictive activity. And what has the opposition said, in terms of this idea of government rights and responsibility, right? The opposition side has told you regarding in terms of their rights to pursue their own values, ethics, morality that they uphold and value, right? As an institution, right, that was chosen by the people to represent that society, these governments get the right to settle regulations or rules that benefits the entire society in a holistic level, right? And we agree, not everyone will be happy with marijuana or gambling being banned, or not everyone will be happy with violent video games and cigarettes being allowed to our society, or alcohol being allowed in our society. But the very value that these governments and states uphold is not upholding the value of happiness of all these citizens, but basically pursuing a happiness that benefits the entire society in a holistic level, right? It's the very reason that they make these certain value judgments as to differentiating stock markets or gambling is because they see a differentiation in terms of values that these different activities bring to their society. Like in terms of violent video games, maybe there are much less harms being imposed due to these violent video games or stock markets, for instance, when it actually increases the investments of a company that becomes the very basis of development that the government pursues. And we basically believe that government or a country has the right as to decide whether or not they want to pursue this idea of gambling or this kind of work ethics or like legitimacy of income in terms of these gambling activities. But before I move on to like impact on society and characteristic of gambling, yeah.
Okay, so what is like ultimately your value judgment of the casinos under your law?
See, that's the beauty of our policy. We're not making an entire value judgment as to what all governments should be doing. We're saying in the very context of this debate, right, where these countries have specifically dictated these gambling activities as to be harmful in terms of like illegalizing that very activity themselves. We're saying there's the very legitimacy as to governments doing that. Just because you say there are certain like people that want to gamble or these like gambling addicts that want to like have these activities, that doesn't justify the very legalization of it. Just like in other cases of other illegal like items, right? Okay, so in the very aspect of impact on our society and characteristic of gambling institutions. So basically the government came up here and told us gambling industries would now be cleaner somewhat, right? But they basically never really gave us as a clear analysis as to why this would happen or why it would lead to such more beneficial institutions. They basically told us a lot of organized crimes or criminal like organizations are related to this industry. Now what we're simply doing with this policy is simply empowering these group of people that are related to these sort of activities in terms of legal measures as to effectively like taking away money from people that are incapable of actually paying back, Mr. Speaker. And we say, what is the real benefit of this kind of legal measures or justifications as to giving these kind of group of people engaged with this kind of activities, Mr. Speaker, related to these gambling industries. But before I move on, yes.
When people go to illegal casinos, they have a moral calculus that if you are unable to pay back that specific casino, you are basically going to be threatened by that criminal organization. That's the incentive that we give these individuals to go to legal casinos and more cleaner places.
That's exactly why, Mr. Speaker, we are tackling down these illegal black markets, right? Because we say, like, in the case of very choices that these people make in terms of going to these black market in search of these kind of profits, right, for the very threatening of their livelihood. We say the state is doing that job in terms of cracking down upon these black markets. If you're saying we're not doing enough of a job of cracking down, then we have to crack it down more efficiently, Mr. Speaker. But basically just simply increasing the accessibility of these industries, Mr. Speaker, and making it a legalized institution where they can actively seek for more people to be engaged in this activity was never justified from your side. As to why this gambling or idea that this gambling activity stands is actually beneficial for the society to promote. Now, secondly, related to the Mr. Speaker, now we will be they were basically saying now we will be actually be able to collect money from those that are trying to those that we are trying to help, right, in terms of these addicts themselves. Then our response to this, then why do we help the poor in the first place, right? We collect money from the rich to help the poor, Mr. Speaker. And it's not really a government's moral responsibility to collect from those people that we want to help. We basically just want to help them for the sake of helping these people, for the sake of preserving their rights. And we're basically biggest problem we see from the government's case today is that we're simply increasing the number of victims or the amount of people that we want to basically help just for the sake of gaining this kind of profit as to actually having this basis as to helping them. But what has the opposition side told you in terms of this area of impact on our society and characteristic of gambling institutions? We have firstly told you how this policy directly diminishes the very work ethics that a country wants to pursue at the end of the day. Because, Mr. Speaker, by increasing this accessibility of institutionalized gambling institutions, we're basically opening up this activity entirely that's entirely based on pure luck or randomness, right? To basically thrust their money regarding this kind of basis of income. And we say this goes against the very idea that they may go towards, such as diligence or idea of encouragement towards the poor, that they still need to go through this procedure of education and those kind of work ethics to achieve their stability in terms of income. And in terms of the third-party harms that we have mentioned, in terms of the very harms that that it causes regarding a family, since economic stability is something that influences the entire family themselves, and how it's more likely to damage the poor in an irreversible manner. For these reasons, we are very proud to oppose.
Speaker spoke for 7 minutes and 35 seconds.
We now move on to the reply section of the debate, and I invite the opposition reply speakers.
So, Mr. Speaker and everyone in the room, we had this really fun debate about whether casinos are really harm, casinos are really good, and it was a very interesting debate. But we believe that this debate isn't just about the harms and benefits of casinos, but it's about how, when a government decides to make a public policy, which was the theme of this round, like what kind of impacts does it have in the society, and what kind of duty does the government has when it comes to that policy and how it affects the social members. And we told you that like a society that has long limited the access of domestic people from going into casino has done that policy because they see to an extent that there is harm to casinos in that activity. And we believe that choice should be made up to the government. We don't want to make value judgment. And because certain governments see that harm, clear harm to it, we should maintain the status quo. Now, the only justification that we heard from the government side today was the fact that they really wanted to solve this problem with illegal casinos all around the society. Now, first of all, we've told you that if that's the really main problem, you should really tackle that illegal institutions itself. Like I told you, how you should make more regulations, bring more police stations. You cannot just simply allow bad things just because it has more bad things in order to attract people to go into less bad things. We think that notion, that principle itself was harm. But we told you that there is more to this policy, that there is going to be much more harms to the people. And we told you about poor people, and we told you about how this is going to influence the minors, the children, which was a point never engaged by the whip speaker. Right, so now let's go on to some of the issues that was really done by in both sides. So we have really lots of parallel examples about how smoking, some governments allow smoking, how some governments allow drugs. Why not casinos? Well, first of all, we believe that yes, every category does have their harm, but we think that harm depends on to what extent that influences on the individual. And from the opposition, we told you that that judgment should be made by each sovereign government, and we leave it up to that. And even if there, for instance, even among the drugs like marijuana or morphines or any kind of drugs, we allow some drugs and we don't allow the others, right? This is because even though they are all harmful in one category, to the extent that they influence the individual when they take it is all different from one another. And we think that the judgment should be and will always be solely left by the government. Even if the impact was the same, we clearly see no reason, just because they're all in the same bad category, we should allow them all at the same time. We think that this analysis itself was very, very morally wrong. And then we told you about how this actually makes this consequence of once you make it accessible. Now, we're not saying that poor shouldn't have the chance to enjoy the pleasure. Of course, we did concede to the fact that casino isn't just about having the pleasure, but also about making false hopes about your economic status and your very own ability. But we told you, once this becomes accessible, we think that people who are very weak and who have more tendency to be lured will only be the victims of this accessibility. We don't want to take away the chances, but when rich people who can afford to buy plane tickets, who can make this calculation of, okay, when I travel to Macau for 7 days, I might spend 3 days in casinos, that temporal decision and having the casinos next door in my town, going there whenever, sometimes when I feel going there whenever you like it, is a totally different concept, and that is the harm that we want to prevent from the very first place. And then we want to talk about these addicts, right? We told you how their psychology itself is very different. So instead of just choosing to go to legal ones, which has more taxes, we think that there is high possibility that they will be lured into going these illegal institutions, right? There is a reason why illegal institutions remain and illegal institutions are still popular, right? Because they use all these methods to lure these individuals from making rational decisions when they're in front of that institutions. So we believe that throughout this whole analysis, it's more of a government duty to actually protect the citizens to the notion that they believe in, to the social norms and values that they agree with. And for these reasons, we're very happy to oppose.
Speaker spoke for 4 4 minutes and 12 seconds.
To end this grand final of the 12th Winter ADI, I call upon the reply speaker from the
The reason why Jiun and Haewon are losing to Namcheol and Yeon is that they just don't understand the status quo. They come up here and tell you that there's always national color in the words of Kim Ji-yoon. They come here and tell you that there's a national trend in saying that these individual countries have their own sovereignty to decide what values that they actually have. We tell you to defer in saying that that trend is actually changing. We continuously told you why there are increased criminal rates within these individual organizations. We've continuously told you why people are going to illegal casinos anyways because of whatever economic status that this side of the house wants to tell you. And we've clearly told you that within our policy and with allowing specific illegal organizations to become far more transparent, to become far more legal, and become far more like beneficial for those individual people, we've clearly proposed today's motion. There are two issues in the overall debate. Number one, the overall value. We've clearly told you from Namcheol and Yeon that this specific value within itself is an individual right. It is an autonomous right that you are granted no matter what. This is the specifically reason why we came up with like the stock market example. They come up and tell you that stock market is something that you do rationally. That's basically an assumption. They never analyze why stock markets are done like with rationale and gambling is not done with rationale. That's like an offensive message that is sent toward everyone in Las Vegas, toward everyone within Macau, within this entire room. We believe that that kind of right should actually be guaranteed for those individuals. They come up and give you two arguments, which is actually one in saying that the government has a responsibility to protect those individuals. We had several responses to that. First of all, we've already told you that it is the capacity of a government to actually provide for those individuals that are harmed within that society. Those individuals are the ones that actually go to illegal casinos. They don't get the jackpot, they're actually bankrupt, and therefore they come in and take the benefits of a government. They take the welfare benefits that the government actually provides. What we're doing on our side of the house is that we're increasing the capacity of those governments to provide for that welfare through taxation, through the kind of proportionate taxation that we are going to do upon the revenue. They come up here and tell you that no, that's so unfair because addictors are going to pay more taxes and less addictors are going to pay less tax. We see that every single day, Mr. Speaker. We see people who are basically like smokers, they pay more sin tax. If you are more addicted, you basically pay more tax. This is like a simple logic that is happening within the status quo that is never rebutted under that side of the house. Then they come up and tell you that there are lots of harms. There's like addiction, there are harms to like foreigner, like poor people, harms to children. We had like several responses to that as well. We've clearly told you that if it is addiction, that leads into my first that argumentation about how it is your own problem. The consequences are basically upon you. Therefore, that specific addiction doesn't cause any social harms whatsoever. We've clearly told you why there's not a lot of addiction within like the Las Vegas countries, within like Macau or whatnot. And we've also told you, given you the example about how even if you increase the amount of illegal activities and if you basically make it legal, that actually does not automatically mean that you're going to have more addiction. They were never able to prove to you the logical link about how you open a specific market and that increases into more addiction. That was something that they have to prove. And they come up with this asymmetric information saying that, oh, these casinos are going to lure people into your specific region. First of all, we've already told you that these individuals, within my arguments about how these individuals actually make a moral calculus. They're not going to risk their specific lives against a criminal organization, but they're rather going to legal organizations. But even if they are lured, you can just give them information. You can write a post-it in front of like the specific casino and say that this is a casino that you don't want to go to. And we've also told you why under a government-regulated system, it's going to be far more transparent. That information is going to be far spread wide. On the other hand, we've clearly told you how these criminal organizations are going to decrease their funds, how their transparency is going to increase within the status quo. But then they come up and tell you why poor people are going to be so disadvantaged. We've clearly differed upon the idea that we should only allow rich people or foreigners within the status quo to allow and enjoy the pleasure that they already have within the status quo. There are a lot of poor people that actually invest within the stock market, and they come up about children. It's like ridiculous, Madam Speaker. We clearly told you there's like regulations within children, and there's like regulations within casinos. They come up and say that people are watching those casinos. We can basically place them in like other areas. This is not that big of a problem. Madam Speaker, the reason why Namcheol and Yeon basically wins today's debate is because Jiun and Haewon was unable to prove the clear, tangible social harms. We've clearly told you why the overall benefits within our society about how it decreases criminal organization, how people are responsible for their own actions, and why everyone has a right to use their own money. We are supremely proud to propose.
Please rise and shake hands with
1 minute and 28 seconds.
the judges will now retire.